Imagine this. A quiet U.S. investment firm operating largely behind the scenes is suddenly maneuvering a massive multi-billion-dollar war chest. Their target? One of Europe's most iconic budget airlines. We're talking about a high-stakes financial chess game where the prize could literally reshape the entire future of European budget travel. The stakes are absolutely astronomical, and the ripple effects? Well, they could alter the global aviation landscape forever. Welcome back to Air Flight Space. Today, we're unpacking a rapidly developing situation that currently has the entire aerospace industry on high alert. We're looking at the proposed £3 billion EasyJet takeover bid. Now, this explainer isn't just about a single airline changing hands. It's really a fascinating look into the massive flow of private capital into global aviation, especially right now during a time of extreme geopolitical and economic turbulence. We're going to cut through the noise, look strictly at the hard data, the official statements, and those intense market forces driving this potential mega deal. So here is our flight plan for today's explainer. First, the £3 billion target, looking at EasyJet's position. Second, who exactly is Castlelake? Third, we're going to map out their massive $5 billion strategy. Fourth, we'll examine the global market pressures creating all this volatility. And finally, we'll project the future outlook for the industry. Let's get into it. All right, part one, the £3 billion target, EasyJet in the crosshairs. £3 billion. That is the current market capitalization of EasyJet. To put that into perspective for us, you're looking at roughly $4 billion US. Now, that number isn't just a basic market valuation. It's essentially a giant bullseye for private equity. EasyJet is an absolute titan in the European low-cost carrier market. So, when an aviation asset of this sheer scale starts drawing international investment interest, it's a huge signal. It points to a potential tectonic shift in how our major airlines are funded, operated, and ultimately, who owns them. But as massive as those financial stakes are, you have to look at how the official channels are playing it. They're being incredibly cautious. The US-based investment firm Castlelake released a statement saying, and I quote, "No approach has been made to the board of EasyJet. Consideration is in the early stages." They also went out of their way to explicitly state that there's zero certainty an offer will even be made, let alone what the terms would be. This perfectly highlights the tension of high-stakes aerospace finance. The whole market knows Castlelake is circling, right? But legally and strategically, they are holding their cards very, very close to the chest. And on the other side of the table, absolute radio silence. EasyJet's board officially declined to comment on the entire situation. Honestly, this strategic silence is exactly what you'd expect in a corporate standoff of this magnitude. They are locked in a defensive posture, essentially daring the U.S. investors to make that first formal, legally binding move before they even think about tipping their hand. Moving to part two. Who is Castlelake? The quiet giant from Minneapolis. Now, if you don't spend your days deep in the weeds of high finance, you might not be familiar with Castlelake. But let me tell you, in the aviation sector, these guys are heavyweights. Based out of Minneapolis, they specialize in asset-based investing, meaning they aren't just pushing traditional stocks and bonds around. They deal in hard physical assets. And they have incredibly deep established interests in global air transport. They understand the entire life cycle of an aircraft. They analyze complex fleet operations. They know exactly how to squeeze revenue out of massive aviation infrastructure. And we literally have the receipts to prove their capability in Europe. Castlelake was a pivotal player in the rescue of the Scandinavian carrier SAS. They held a massive interest in the consortium that essentially caught the airline during its Chapter 11 restructuring. This proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they aren't just looking in from the outside. They are highly experienced and totally comfortable diving headfirst into complex, distressed European airline operations. They know the regulatory hurdles, and they know the operational realities. Which brings us to part three, a $5 billion strategy. Let's take a look beneath the surface. Check out this timeline. It's kind of like watching a grandmaster set up the board. Starting back in 2020, Castlelake began deploying over $5 billion into airlines and leasing companies. Then, fast forward to 2023 and 2024, they execute that massive SAS rescue we just talked about. In 2025, they launch Merit Air Finance and successfully transfer over 100 jets to Avalon. And now, 2026, they are formally exploring this EasyJet takeover. See the pattern? They've been systematically moving pieces across the global aviation board for over half a decade now. Let's break down that playbook a bit more because it's fascinating. Step 1, deploy massive capital to airlines right when the market is fluctuating. Step 2, establish dedicated debt and lending divisions so you can control the actual financing of the aircraft. And Step 3, target a major commercial carrier directly. They have methodically built the infrastructure to lend, to lease, and now to potentially outright acquire one of the most recognizable budget airlines on the planet. And this clearly demonstrates just how financially agile they really are. Just look at this contrast. Recently, they set up Merit Air Finance. That's a brand new, entirely separate aviation lending division specifically aimed at providing debt capital for new and used aircraft. But at the exact same time, they sold off Castlelake Aviation, their former leasing division, to the lesser Avalon. That was a huge transaction, offloading over 100 aircraft. Why does that matter? Because it makes them highly liquid. By shifting away from direct leasing and pivoting to being a massive debt capital provider, they're clearing the runway. They are building the ultimate war chest required for a mega acquisition like EasyJet. All right, Part 4, Global Market Pressures, the Turbulent Landscape. We have to zoom out here because the global aviation sector is flying straight into some severe multi-front headwinds. In Europe, the ongoing Middle East conflict has the EU explicitly warning of tighter jet fuel supplies. Over in Asia, the highly demanding Indian market forced major carrier Indigo to post full-year losses and physically cut capacity. And looking at safety and defense, we're seeing domestic unease in the US over public access to cockpit audio from a UPS crash, while at the same time Canada is launching domestic production of military drones for the war in Ukraine. The entire aerospace sector is incredibly volatile right now, strained by geopolitics, supply chain disruptions, and safety protocols. Let's unpack these specific headwinds a little more because they directly impact why an airline might look vulnerable to a buyout. The European Commission's Oil Coordination Group warned that jet fuel supplies could tighten within weeks if the Middle East conflict continues. You have to remember, jet fuel is a carrier's most critical variable cost. Tighter supplies immediately squeeze profit margins for an airline like EasyJet. Over in Asia, Indigo is literally removing older jets from service to cope with their losses. On the regulatory front, U.S. safety investigators are actually restricting public docket access due to concerns that audio spectrum analysis could reconstruct crew voices from a crash, which shows increasing friction around operational transparency. And globally, aerospace supply chains are being heavily diverted as nations like Canada ramp up uncrewed weapons systems. This statement from Indigo regarding their full-year loss really just sums up the global sentiment perfectly. They called it one of the most demanding periods for Indian aviation. Think about that. If a massive operator in the rapidly expanding Indian market is struggling so much that they have to cut capacity and retire jets, you can really start to understand the deep financial friction being felt by airlines worldwide right now. But here's the thing. This exact friction is what makes private equity firms see a golden opportunity. When airlines are pressured by fluctuating fuel costs and geopolitical instability, their public valuations take a hit. They become vulnerable. And that's exactly when highly liquid investors like Castlelake swoop in. So, Part 5, the future outlook. What happens next? Over the coming months, based on everything we're tracking, here are the most likely scenarios. First, Castlelake's early-stage consideration is either going to mature into a highly structured, formal bid, or it'll just quietly stall out and fade away. Second, you can bet EasyJet's board will maintain their defensive silence until they are legally forced to respond to an actual offer on paper. Third, and this is absolutely crucial, the very real risk of tightened EU fuel supplies could alter EasyJet's valuation in real time. That completely changes the financial math for Castlelake. And finally, there remains the very real possibility of a finalized formal offer. If that happens, it's going to trigger massive regulatory reviews and send absolute shockwaves through the global aerospace industry. So I want to leave you with this to really chew on. Could this be the beginning of a brand new chapter in aviation history? Are we entering an era where quiet, multi-billion-dollar asset-based investment firms from the US start systematically acquiring the legacy low-cost carriers of Europe? Because if Castlelake successfully leverages its immense capital to take over EasyJet, it won't just be a simple business transaction. It will fundamentally rewrite the rulebook for global airline ownership for the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive explainer. If you want to keep exploring the complex engineering, economics, and real-world operations of the aerospace industry, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Airflight Space. Give this explainer a like, share it with your fellow aviation professionals, and hey, I want to hear your take. Do you think Castlelake is actually going to execute this £3 billion takeover, or are the market pressures going to force them to back down? Let me know your opinion in the comments below, and we'll see you on the next flight.